Willowbrook State School on Staten Island was opened in 1947. The facility was for children who had various developmental disabilities. However, what it truly was is disturbing and confronting, and far beyond the imagination. The school staff, who were entrusted to teach and care for these mentally disabled children, instead exposed them to diseases, subjected them to horrifying abuse, and vaccine trials. They lived in filthy conditions, and it is said, the stench of death filled the air. Alas, as if that wasn't enough, they even had their own local urban legend, named Cropsey, that turned out to be fact, not fiction. Willowbrook's inhumane conditions landed it in the national spotlight multiple times, before its eventual closing, in 1987. At its peak, it housed 6,200 residents in buildings designed to house no more than 4,000. In addition to overcrowding, budget cuts led to the loss of 600 staff, leaving the remaining to be a ratio of 1 staff to care for 50 patients. It was impossible to keep everyone clean, fed, supervised, or even clothed. Patients would rip their clothes off, run around nude, masturbate in public, or just roll around in the filth and feces on the floor. Former resident Bernard Carabello described getting beaten with sticks and belt buckles. He recalled being kicked into a wall by staff members, and went on to say, sexual abuse was rampant at the hands of staff and other residents, which makes you wonder how many pregnancies may have occurred. As far as education from this school, there was no behavioral modification exercises, no social skills, or hygiene and grooming skills of any kind. Instead, their days were spent confined in a filthy, crowded room. Showering was a rare event, and the residents did so in groups and were only given 5 minutes to clean themselves with no soap, no toothpaste, and no individual towels. For residents needing help with eating, they were basically force-fed gruel as fast as possible. A half-hour activity reduced to 3 minutes, or less. The severe overcrowding eventually led to a public health crisis, as literally every resident admitted, quickly contracted hepatitis. However, this was no accident. A mother, in order to get her child a spot in overcrowded Willowbrook, had to make a bargain, consenting to allow her child to be part of a quest to find a vaccine for hepatitis. Having no choice, after having tried so many different places, and so many arrangements which failed, the mother agreed to it. This child would become one of many in medical trials, conducted by Dr. Krugman. Dr. Saul Krugman was a respected pediatrician from New York, who wanted to determine if there were multiple strains of hepatitis, and whether a vaccine could be created to protect against the disease. Krugman and his partner, Dr. Joan Giles, used the Willowbrook residents to test a preliminary vaccine for this disease, one that had already killed millions worldwide. From 1955 to 1970, children were injected with the virus itself, or made to drink chocolate milk, mixed with feces from other infected children, in order to study their immunity. Dr. Krugman published all the results in prominent medical journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. As if things were not bad enough, enter Cropsey, the not-so-urban legend. Children with mental disabilities began to vanish in Staten Island, literally, without a trace. It began with 5-year-old Alice Pereira in 1972, then 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes in 1981, next was 11-year-old Tyahis Jackson in 1983, and then 22-year-old Hank Gaforio in 1984. In 1987, Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome, went for a walk and never came home. The community launched a massive search party, which ended in the woods behind the Willowbrook State School. It's here the legend of Cropsey emerges. First, they discovered Jennifer's small foot, and then the rest of her body, that had been buried in a shallow grave. After investigation, they learned Cropsey was Andre Rand, a custodian at Willowbrook State School back in the 1960s. He also aided the physical therapists at the school. His employment ended before the facility's closure. However, he set up a camp in the woods and roamed the tunnels, kidnapping and murdering disabled children. In 1969, Rand had been arrested for attempted rape. After luring a 9-year-old into his car, drove her to an empty parking lot, and removed both their clothes, before a passing police car saw them. He was sentenced to 4 years, and only serving 16 months. In 1983, working for a school bus company, he picked up 11 random kids off the street without parental consent, and took them joyriding for 5 hours for no sane reason. Whatever he had planned, he decided against, but was charged with unlawful imprisonment and served 10 months. There was also mention of a possible connection to a satanic cult. There were signs of satanic rituals being held out in the woods, and in the abandoned buildings of Willowbrook, and in the crumbling remains of the nearby Seaview Hospital. Some briefly theorized that Rand may have been procuring the children for cults. The whereabouts of Alice Pereira, Tyahese Jackson, and Hank Gafforio remain unknown. Rand is the prime suspect, yet refuses to tell anyone where their bodies are, and protests his innocence to any law enforcement official or reporter in earshot. However, Rand boasted to fellow inmates about his disgusting bloodlust, quoted in a conversation stating, "You know, me and Ted Bundy are alike in many ways. We both used Volkswagens. Bundy's thing was women, my thing is kids. Do you think the police could figure that out?" So, in concluding, it took over a decade to rehome the residents of Willowbrook. The last to leave did so September 1987. Governor Mario M. Cuomo declared Willowbrook officially and forever closed. However, if you think there is a happily ever after, think again. The horrors of Willowbrook continued for 40 years, the horrors, the screams, the abuse, the fear, the cries of desperation, 40 years to shut an inhumane institution down. As humans, it appears we are still capable of atrocities against those unable to defend themselves. February 2020, a New York Times investigation into the former residents of the Willowbrook institution, 2,300 who are alive today, are still suffering from mistreatment. The Times reported that in 2019, there have been 97 reported allegations of physical abuse by group home workers against former Willowbrook patients. A further 34 allegations of psychological abuse, and hundreds more of neglect and other mistreatment, like improper use of restraints or seclusion, medication errors, and theft. Investigations were conducted by the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, but were unable to prove abuse, claiming that strong union protections allowed them to block their dismissals in arbitration.